This may sound confusing to many viewers, but the concept of sujood is not what it's made to be. It does not exclusively pertain to worship in the ceremonial or ritualistic sense in which it's commonly understood. That is, to physical acts of, say, bowing, praying, or chanting at an object. It's actually a principle of motion. But before we proceed, we must first contend with an explanation of motion, a concept that had been subject of a centuries-old debate. The best explanation, now thrusted from the course of science, is the Aristotelian conception of motion, included under the larger framework of nature, as found in these physics, which, unlike the definition adopted in its place, conceives motion ontologically. Nature and motion for Aristotle are coterminous, together describing an inner principle of change and of being at rest. This varies from the Cartesian or Galilean conception on which modern physics is founded, a purely material phenomenon describing a movement from place to place, or a mere change of place without inquiring into the forces that produces the change. Aristotle's version, by contrast, is rooted in the so-called forces that produce change. An adequate understanding of the significantly richer Aristotelian definition will show it to be very consistent with the concept of sujood. Motion here is not a mere change of place, an accidental displacement, a spontaneous movement, but rather a comprehensive inquiry into the principles that cause the phenomena of motion in the first place. Why should anything be disposed to change, and what is change in the first place? To him, it is an intrinsic property of things. By merely existing, things that are in existence are said to be in motion. That is, they are actualized in the form by which they are then distinguished, i.e., the qualities that characterize them and which we grasp about them. Even when seemingly at rest, i.e., physically motionless, they are actually in motion just by holding together their form, their qualities, their appearances, predispositions, insofar as these are contained potentially in them. As we found in our earlier investigations, the language of the Quran is teleological, expressing precisely this sense of motion. And in teleology, what matters, what takes precedence, isn't the occasion in which something is perceived to be physically changing its location, but rather the cause and virtue of which the thing is moving. But not this or that cause, but the why should this thing move in the first place, i.e., its nature. Whereas in modern physics, motion is, as best shown in kinematics and geometry, abstracted and separated from the things to whom motion is attributed and proposed by itself. In the Aristotelian sense, however, motion is not describable geometrically. Motion here is not so much a transition in place as from potentiality into actuality, from what's possible and could be to what's actual and is. Motion is conceived in this sense because for Aristotle, form comes before being, or as he put it, actual being is a precondition of being in the process. Motion consists in three modalities corresponding with the syllogistic structure of the Aristotelian logic. Aletheia, the alethic modality. What we mean by aletheia is the basis, in virtue of which anything is said to be what it is. It describes a mode of disclosure, unconcealment, disambiguation. All motion is based in motive. We can approach it by analogy to the alphabet, which is a mode of disclosure, an alethic model, insofar as all notions, all phenomena, all ideas are only ever expressible, let alone judged, within the narrow parameters of the 26 letters offered, in this case by English. It's the basic mold by which the universe with all its diversity is shaped, the essential menstruum or paint with which reality at large is colored. Everything we know is predicated off the system of language. It is a monogram of designated syllables, which we substitute for the parts of ideas that convey things in the same fashion as stones and pebbles did numbers in the beginning of calculus. The systems of language and number are prior to the ideas to which they give expression, and as with the alphabet, such is the case with any given entity, insofar as the entity is a form housing its own mode of disclosure. The analog for the 20-odd letters of the alphabet is a list of fundamental attributes and dispositions that constitute the personality or identity of the entity, and which predispose or orient it. In short, its nature. Deontos, the deontic modality. There are two ways of understanding this mode, ideally or mentally, then physically or mechanically. The best way to understand this is by thinking of it as a point of reference or a point of view from which we perceive something. Perceiving anything sits in an opposition to ourselves. We build a scheme. We establish a spectrum or a boundary whose limits are the observer and the object of observation. We call it an object because it is something as specific as we are, yet outside of us, our counterpart. Whatever occupies that not I position is called an object, and our relation to it is called objective. Physically, here we're dealing with physical objectives, a place to be reached, or a project to be realized. I share with the place which I set myself to reach, say my home, as the objective to which my act of intention is directed. It's the place, ideal or physical, which dictates in which way, manner, or direction I may move. In short, it is that in virtue of which we have intention. This intention, however, is nested in my own nature, hence the inseparability of form and motion in Aristotle's system. Potentiality implies actuality. Actuality presupposes potentiality. Reason precedes action. An essentially dualistic scheme appears to characterize all modes of being and of consciousness. Diantos is not a different thing than aletheia, but merely aletheia objectified, or turned into a goal, as for example, how a plan is something both preconceived as well as something to be attained or actualized. In our language analogy, we possess the alphabet as a faculty or form, of which we project upon an external thing, as a net is cast upon a school of fish, select and logically devised combinations. The object itself thus becomes linguistic, or a projection. These two cooperate and are indispensable to one another. The mental spills over into the physical, and the physical concretizes the mental every step of the way. Thus, this modality is a program which modifies motion. It is the program of motion. Episteme, the epistemic modality. This modality is implied in the former too. It denotes how, within the alethic deontic parameter that we've just set, or the point and its limit, we transition from one mode to the other. It is the mechanism by which we conceive the alethic point as opposed to the deontic, or the deontic as opposed to the alethic. The epistemic mode is how the above two communicate with each other. In the mental space, this happens instantaneously, as in we see something. We don't think of this in terms of motion, though it actually is, a projection from the I to the not I, from the alethic source to the deontic limit. When not instantaneous, we take liberty in thinking. We contemplate. As when we're trying to solve a problem, we think in steps, we oscillate between the parts of ideas. We combine, subtract, oppose, deduce, etc. to reach the prospect that is the solution. Or, if I'm trying to reach my house, the goal is attenuated into mini-goals. I walk to the bus stop, I scan my card, I traverse a certain number of blocks, I get off the bus, or I get into this or that street, etc. When perceived from a certain point, the objective seems to be attracting us. From another, we're dictating it. From another, we see how both mutually influence and determine one another, or how they conspire together so as to produce the effect sought, or to program our behavior. In physical space, we're not afforded the luxury of freely alternating or jumping from one idea to the next, or of thinking about two things that are geographically speaking miles apart, or temporally speaking days or months apart. Here we confront the problem of physical space, which in the mental sphere is non-existent. The epistemic mode is how we reach the deontic limit from the alethic, or how we understand the deontic to be a limit with respect to a beginning point. The deontic mode here transforms from a vision or prospect, say a housing project, into a physical objective, where we find ourselves dealing with the logistics of the vision, resource allocation, finances, manpower, transportation, etc. What we've so effortlessly and timelessly, I may add, built in the mental sphere is, in the physical space, a question of process. Those modalities are interdependent and inseparable. They are actually modes which we enter into and which, depending on the mode, alter our perception of the world.
The world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you.
Now, the above three modalities, taken together and understood in their synergy, produces a new concept, Sujood. Now, out of these three modes, Sujood seems to emphasize the epistemic, though in no way exclusive of the other two. In Surah Al-Hajj, verse 18, we're told that Sujood is a mode in which diverse forms of life are engaged, amongst which, interestingly enough, are trees and mountains and stars. How does this make sense if Sujood is understood as no more than a certain physical posture? Additionally, as verse 83 of Surah Al-Imran states, how can something perform Sujood involuntarily, or be in some sense coerced into it? What does it mean for a tree or a mountain to be in a state of Sujood? As said, any motion is teleological, and is to be understood in terms of the three modalities. This is a basic definition. However, motion only ascends into the concept of Sujood when the object of motion, of action, of tension, stands to the subject of motion, that which acts, as the highest possible thing to which it can aim. Think of it as the analog or equivalent of the scenario reaching my house, of which all possible motions mediating myself and my goal are attenuated versions of the overall motion. The objective, or the deontic limit, is vast enough as to be the rationale behind every act of motion. Only that here the objective isn't relatively urgent and proximate as reaching my house, but distant enough as to be a point after which one journeys in a lifetime, like the N or S signs on a compass, which aren't so much physical places as indicators of direction. If we ask why anything moves, sure we can give direct answers for why, but in no way do such answers exhaust the question at hand all the time. For instance, a lion goes after a buffalo because it is hungry. But this is only relatively true. It is the right, convenient answer. But other, higher reasons can be given, as it needs to survive, and the only way which guarantees its survival is through sustenance. Hence the lion goes after the buffalo because by eating it, it ensures its survival. A yet higher reason can be given, that the lion goes after the buffalo because it is in the lion's nature as a predator to do so. A yet higher one, perhaps the highest, would be the lion goes after the buffalo because it is how the relation is innately or naturally constituted. A transcendent order determined it this way, had furnished in the lion the precise faculty, i.e. the sharp claws and canines, by which it may take on something of the size of a buffalo. Thus we see that in each case we're ascending the rungs of reason, and that the ascent always leads to a kind of superordinate universal plan. What this means then is that Sujood is the quintessential motion, the equivalent of Aristotle's nature. Motion only attains its meaning here. What enables anything to move is the fact that there is an object, and this objective isn't for the lion the buffalo or for the plant the source of light, as these are relative objectives, or attenuations of a much vaster objective, or, holistically speaking, the real objective. Here the true objective, the object of Sujood, isn't the immediate object of desire or fear or hunger expressed impulsively by the creature, but that which gives these contextually ambiguous pursuits their ontological meaning. It's the order that made it so that the buffalo is prey to the lion, or the lion predator to the buffalo, or the source of light, the object of the flower. It's the motion towards that order itself which gave these things their dispositions. Here the object towards which the different species are tending is one. It is the order to which, by merely executing or fulfilling their biological needs, they give immediate proof and expression to. Sujood has two senses. The first mode excludes free will. It describes how all creation share one goal and object, in that, by merely existing, by fulfilling their biological tasks, they are already involved in Sujood. A turtle knows only how to be a turtle, a stone, a tree, a tree. Creation here is restricted and limited to their cosmic role. A program is encoded into them outside of which they are incapable of operating. This is the first sense of Sujood. This is what Abraham discerned as he observed the celestial objects. He discerned the most basic and fundamental program of the universe, motion, or Sujood, which he started with. He saw that the constellation, the sun and the moon, all share this. They all have a function of some sort. Beyond their apparent differences, they're all characterized by process, by motion, in the above sense. The second sense of Sujood involves what the creature does by will in the context just mentioned, within the limit prescribed. Here is involved the ethos of the creature, that a human being acts in a human-like way, to speak in a human way, to walk on two legs, describes a mode of sujood that's characteristic of and exclusive to humans, but how he chooses to articulate himself within the biological parameters allotted to him, where his two legs take him, what he chooses to invest his human intellect into, the ideas he chooses to represent and stand for, expresses and thereby completes the concept of sujood, as here that which is outside of one's control, that is the biological plan, meets that which is under one's control, his actions and ethos. The former is subordinated to the latter, and is placed in service of an idea. Now the idea automates him inasmuch as he does his own body. Now if said idea and virtue of which sujood is attained is directed towards the same holistic plan as accounted for by the Creator in all of his decrees, then the ethos of the specific creature and the agenda of his Creator are in perfect harmony. And this ethos, when conceived linguistically and ascribed a term, becomes for us Islam. Islam is a mode of sujood. Here the side of sujood which lies within the domain of free will harmonizes and is continuous with the biological plan. Perfect consistency is attained, and sujood thereby attains its true sense. When God asked the earth to swallow the water from Noah's flood, an action was elicited which execution is contingent on the earth's given constitution, and which lies within its capacity. Here the elicitation shows the earth's capacity for free will, and by executing the divine command, it was involved in sujood, in the second sense. The divine command, it must be noted, takes into account the entire cosmic reality of which Earth is a part. There's no divine command as regards a specific, parochial aspect of the universe that excludes the rest of the universe. His act of creation is an addition, which takes into account all the complex ways in which the new creation can affect or be affected by the environment, all possible processes that are to issue from the individual creature, from the immediate, for example its mode of sustenance, to the remotest possible point, together form an indispensable part of the divine decree of creation. In short, any creation is a creation sub specie aeternitatis. And just as every creation has its unique, divinely allotted place in the cosmic scheme, so is the behavior issuing from the creature has cosmic implication of the sort that reminds one of the butterfly effect. Conceived in this holistic sense, the ethical side of things is a natural corollary, and is consequent upon the tightly interconnected and well-coordinated way in which the Creator chose to structure his universe. Nothing here is an accident of the time and place. Everything that happens to exist exists by design, and is wholly precious to the Creator who chose to give it existence, and is to him an indispensable thread in the total cosmic fabric. Thus to be in a state of sujood is to corroborate and propitiate the divine plan, to know and set it as one's deontic mode and objective, to function in service of the holistic vision which God had decreed in the morning of creation. Every creation expresses sujood in its own unique way, but the objective remains unified. For human beings, our mode of sujood is what every doctrine, every system of philosophy has attempted to formulate. Even in a human context, every human being unique, has a unique mode of sujood that's different from the rest, but which objective remains the same as everyone else's. Sujood to God thus means that one subordinates his passive and active sides, i.e. his body and mind, to the universal plan. But there's a third condition, a catch. One has to know the plan in order to comport themselves to it.